Evaluation Methods, which has been organized by CLEAR with COE and UNICEF. I'm Priya Arora, and I'm the Communications Manager with CLEAR. CLEAR is a global initiative which is coordinated by the World Bank's Independent Evaluation Group, and it is aiming to strengthen M&E and project management capacities in developing countries. The CLEAR Regional Center for South Asia is hosted by JPAL at IFMR. The moderator for today's roundtable is Catherine Hay. Catherine is a seasoned evaluator and leader with 15 years of progressive experience in evidence-based development. She's been researching, working, and living in South Asia for over 15 years. Catherine specializes in evaluation design, planning, implementation, and use in developing country contexts. A champion in evaluation field building, her work includes building evaluation curriculums in universities in South Asia and supporting evaluation communities. Catherine has been instrumental in the conceptualization and realization of the first evaluation conclave held in New Delhi in 2010. She also seeded and supported a growing group of South Asian evaluators through a group called the Community of Evaluators. And she's currently editing with Shubh Kumar Range a book on evaluation in South Asia. Before handing over the mic to Catherine, I'd just like to go over some housekeeping rules. Tea coffee will be served during the break downstairs in the veranda. We'll have somebody outside to guide you there. Each of you have been provided a feedback form, which is inside the folders on your desk. So if you could fill them up and hand it over to us before you leave, it'll be great. And lastly, please make sure your cell phones are on silent mode. I'll now hand over to Catherine to take over the rest of the session. Welcome, Catherine.
Thank you. First of all, it's such a pleasure to be here, and looking down at this long table, I can't even see the people at the end. But again, I can remember a few years ago when trying to get together a group to talk about evaluation definitely didn't need quite as big a room as this. So it's great to see these spaces growing and more interest and different groups getting together in the region and on building the field of evaluation. I'm particularly pleased to be moderating today and introducing this session because two of the three groups that are hosting this organization are groups that I'm involved in. I'm a member of the Community of Evaluators, one of the groups that's hosting this meeting today. And I'm also on the advisory group for CLEAR. And of course, I'm friends with everyone at UNICEF, so that's the third connection. But in terms of CLEAR and the COE, I think it's just been excellent to see how those groups have been getting stronger, how more and more evaluators are coming out for events like this. This is the fifth in the series that CLEAR's been running and creating this opportunity for us to get together and talk about our work as evaluators or as users of evaluation. Or as perhaps researchers who want to do more evaluation or are doing it and want to get peer feedback and insights. So again, I think it's excellent that we have these spaces now, and I would encourage all of you to make sure if you've come here by chance, if somebody's brought you along, make sure you're on the mailing list of CLEAR, and those of you who are interested in the Community of Evaluators, Shubh will be talking a little bit more at the end of the day about how you could also get more engaged with that group. I'm also very pleased to be here because of the focus, the topic on equity. I think as evaluators, if we want our field to grow, we have to be relevant. And I think there's really no other way of being relevant to development in the context in which we are all working and living of India or South Asia more broadly than to look at issues of relevance. So if evaluation isn't helping us to push towards more equitable societies, I mean, I don't know why we would want to be doing it. So I'm really excited about the topic today. Evaluation can challenge mainstream development paradigms and processes, or it can reinforce them. And I think that the default is more likely that it will just reinforce them and perpetuate existing power imbalances unless people actively work to make it different. And so I think that's what we're going to be looking at today. And making it different, I think, involves working at all different levels. In terms of reframing the kinds of questions we're asking. What does working mean? Well, who is it working for? And who says that this is what working looks like? So there's a whole reframing that can happen at the question level. There's certainly a lot of work that needs to happen at the design level. So a lot of the things that we're interested in changing, those constructs that we're interested in changing, are difficult to measure. We don't have ready measures. So mainstream development and mainstream evaluation approaches maybe haven't given us the kinds of measures and tools that we need to measure the things we're interested in when we begin looking at persistent inequities. So again, I think today we're also going to get into some of those design questions and the work that's needed there. And then, of course, the big one is always use. You can have evidence on that says lots of different things, but does it get used? Is it good evidence? What are the gaps and challenges to use, especially in trying to address persistent inequities? So I think we're going to dive into that. Cash transfers is a great topic to dive into that because you've got such polarization and you've got such different interests. So thinking about how to negotiate that and push for the use of good evidence and better evidence is, I think, a really interesting challenge. So I'm hoping we'll have some time for that. I'm going to start by introducing your first two speakers. They're going to speak and they're going to talk more not at a theoretical level in the sense that they only do theory, but they're going to talk at a more global level and a more theoretical level and give you some of the framing for our discussion on equity. And then we'll have some questions and answers and take a tea break. And then our next speaker is going to frame some of those ideas more in the context of India and talk about sort of some of the challenges or issues here. And then we'll move right into a case study, which is, again, India-based. So we're going to hopefully cover a really interesting terrain, going over some of the concepts, some of the theories, some of the approaches more broadly, and then moving down and getting into a real case. And we hope that you'll also have time also to share some of your experiences in our discussion. So I'm just going to introduce the first two speakers for now, and we can dive right into that. So they're both here on my left. So we have Michael Bamberger. Many of you may know Michael. He's got 45 years of experience in development evaluation, including a decade working with NGOs in Latin America on housing, urban development issues, almost 25 years working on evaluation and gender development issues with the World Bank in Latin America, Africa, Asia, and the Middle East, a decade working as an independent evaluation consultant, working with lots of different UN agencies. He's published extensively on evaluation. He's been involved as faculty for evaluation training. So I think, and he has a PhD in sociology for those of you who are interested in knowing the disciplinary background as well. So, but I think you can see that he's sat at many parts of the table in his evaluation career, which I think affords him a very unique perspective on that. So I'm going to call him, are you speaking first or Marco? Okay, and our first speaker is Marco Sagone. Marco is the head of decentralized evaluation and national evaluation capacity development at UNICEF. He's got a really long card so that title can fit in. He's the co-chair of Eval Partners. He's also on the UNEG task force on national evaluation capacities. He's a true thought leader in evaluation field building. He's responsible for the evaluation function and the national evaluation capacity development portfolios at UNICEF. He has also been co-chair of the Eval Partners Initiative, which is a field-building initiative in evaluation, and the UNEG Task Force on National Evaluation Capacities. He also has an extensive background spanning many regions, many countries. He's also co-authored and authored many books, and he's really been a lead in making available evaluation trainings online, and I think the platform that he spearheaded got 1 million hits last month. So again, he's just been a true champion, and in recognition of that, again, congratulations for last year's Alva and Gunnar Myrdal Practice Award by AEA, which is a very difficult award to get. So looking forward to both of you. So I'm going to call you up, and we'll have about a 40-minute presentation by both of them, followed by some question and answers, and then a tea break. So over to you, Marco.
Okay, thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. Very, very, very big.
evaluation function. So this is more a kind of theoretical book by different authors, while this one is more kind of practical manual. And today we will focus on this one. As I told you, those books are available for free download. You have to go to myme.org, and then when you arrive here in the page, you go here, access for free. You just click, and then here there is all a series of books that are available, and so you just click and then you can download it. So in the next 40 minutes, we will try to go through these 6 points. First of all, we will just have an introduction on what does equity mean. We all know that different organizations, different countries have different understanding of equity. So what I will present here is mainly what, from UNICEF perspective, what we mean with equity. Maybe it's not exactly the same kind of meaning that you have, but we are mainly presenting the UNICEF perspective on this. Then, why does equity matter? What are the determinants of inequity? Then just a few issues about equity-based programming, and then we enter the part of equity-focused evaluations. So what is an equity-focused evaluation and how to manage an equity-focused evaluation? Let's start with the first. What does equity mean? We know that there are disparities between population groups. Some of these disparities may be unavoidable, meaning that they are mainly driven by biology. So, for example, older men with 45 years of experience in evaluation, unfortunately, are more likely, for example, to have heart disease than young children. So this is driven by biology and is not possible to avoid. But there are other disparities between population groups that are avoidable and unfair, and those are termed inequities. So the concept of equity is based on the notion of fairness and social justice. Now, why does equity matter? Well, there are different reasons why equity matters in development. The first two are more economical, in the sense that equity has a significant positive impact in reducing poverty. One clear example is Brazil, for example. As you probably know, Brazil has been working quite seriously in the last decades in reducing the disparities between the worst off and the best off groups. And this has had a very positive impact in the reduction of poverty in Brazil. Another reason is that equity have a positive impact on economic growth, because if you include all the different groups of society in the economic life of the country, you will be able to take advantage of the resources of the entire population. But equity has also a positive impact in the construction of a socially fair and democratic society. As you know, societies that are very unequal, they are more likely to have significant social unrest. Also, higher level of crimes or violent conflicts within the society. In addition, also, prolonged inequity may lead to the so-called banalization of inequity, in the sense that if a situation of inequity has been going on for several years or decades, then the population, including the excluded one, see natural, something that there is nothing to do against, and therefore the society will not be prompt to really take action to change the. And last but not least, inequity constitutes a violation of human rights and hampers the equitable achievement of human development and the Millennium Development Goals. So these are a kind of series of reasons why equity is important in development. And perhaps the key message here is to say that depending from which organization you work, depending from which background, academic background you are coming from, etc., usually we tend to focus only on the social aspect or maybe on the economical aspect. But the important is to say that depending on who is our audience, we should try to speak the language of our audience. So if we are talking to the Minister of Finance, we will talk more about the economical reasons for equity. If we are talking to the Minister of the Interior, for example, we will talk more about the social unrest in the society, etc. Now, what are the determinants of inequity? Well, the most obvious is income. And here is just a graph from Nepal, stunting trend for children by wealth quintiles. So the key message here is just that, if you look only at the national average, you have a certain situation. But if you disaggregate, for example, by income, you see that there are disparities that may not only not narrowing but even increasing. So income is one determinant of inequity, but is not the only one. Another is also location. Here, once again, is a. It doesn't matter the indicator. I mean, the key messages in this series of slides is just to show really that the big disparities, the big inequities between, for in this case, the worst off region and the best off region. So here is always the national average, and here is best off, and here is the worst off region. Another determinant of inequity is also ethnicity. And here is an example from Cambodia, percentage of 17 years old children who never attended school. And here you can see the difference between the capital, where the population from the majority group, and this where you have a main population from a minority group. Another determinant is gender. And another determinant that sometimes is forgotten is about disabilities. And just look to these indicators. I mean, 90% of children with disabilities in developing countries do not attend school. And that's really, let's say, the worst indicators, whatever type of determinants you are taking into consideration. So the key message here is that when we are talking about inequities, we are not talking only about income, but we are talking about several type of determinant of inequities. And even if, unfortunately, those of you sitting cannot read the slides, the idea is that we always have to keep in mind the multidimensionality of inequity. Here is, for example, the differences between the learning achievements in Kenya. So here is the national average. And then if you disaggregate by richest and poorest, You can see already the difference. But then if you take among the poorest and you disaggregate between the children who receive an extra tuition, for example, cash transfer, for example, or who do not receive an extra tuition, you see the difference. And then if you disaggregate this again, once more, female and male. So the idea is that we should not take the different population group as a homogeneous group, but even within the disadvantaged groups, there are those who stay better and those who stay worse. So we should always look at the multidimensionality of inequity. Now, let me say that the final aim of equity-focused programming, while I'm from UNICEF, so I'm mainly talking about children, is that all rights for all children everywhere. So that's the final aim. The final aim is human rights for everybody, taking in consideration that different population groups are in different situations. So to arrive to this final aim, all rights for everybody, we need to prioritize the most deprived. So equity is a kind of strategy to arrive to the human rights for everybody. This means that when we set goals for a program, for a policy, we should set goals that are not the same for all the different groups, but we should always keep in mind the disparity between the different groups, and we should try to avoid this situation where the equity gap is increasing, and we should always try to aim for the green situation where the equity gap is reducing. Now I'm really going through it very quickly because of the time. So this one was just a kind of introduction of some of the key concepts about equity, and now we are moving really to what's focus evaluation. From this definition, you will see that we are not talking about something completely new. Here is a definition from UNEG, that is the UN Evaluation Group. It's a definition for evaluation in general. That is an assessment made of the relevance, effectiveness, efficiency, impact, and sustainability of intervention. In the case of equity-focused evaluation, we are saying the relevance, impact, efficiency, etc. on equitable development results. So in the case of equity-focused evaluation, mainly we are looking at what has been the effect of intervention to the most deprived population. And the second is what has been the effect of the intervention to the gap between the most deprived and the less deprived population group. So we are not talking about something completely new. We are talking about a specific focus, a specific lens, really on equitable development results. And this explains it very well. So in the case of a, let's say, normal or traditional evaluation, for example, this is stunting trend for children in Nepal. Let's assume that we are evaluating the national policy on nutrition in Nepal. If we are using a normal evaluation, mainly we will look at the national average, that is this one. So it's going down, is reducing. It means that the situation, a national average, is improving. So a normal evaluation would say that the national policy is having a positive impact. So very good, continue with it. If you are using an equity-focused evaluation, the result will be completely the opposite. Because you will look at you would disaggregate the data, and you will look at the different population group, and as you can see, the richest one, that are these two, the situation is increasing, the situation is improving very quickly, While for the poorest quintiles, the situation not only is not improving, but actually is deteriorating. So it means that this policy, for example, it's having a negative impact on the most deprived. So in the case of normal, let's say traditional evaluations, their key result would be positive. They are having a positive effect in the malnutrition of children. If you're using an equity-focused evaluation, the findings would be very different. When it comes to the purpose of equity evaluation, once again, they are very similar to all the other evaluations. So the purpose of equity-focused evaluation is about accountability, is about organizational learning and improvement, is about evidence-based policy advocacy, etc. Once again, the focus is accountability, equitable development results, is about learning of what works for the disadvantaged groups and what does not work for the disadvantaged group. Evidence-based policy advocacy, once again, would be about generating evidence focusing on the most disadvantaged groups. So this is, once again, we're talking about the focus. But in addition, in the case of equity-focused evaluation, this aspect is very important, the empowerment of worst groups. Because the idea is that an equity-focused evaluation should use a process that empower the worst off group. So even the actual evaluation should be an intervention to reduce the disparities and to empower the disadvantaged groups. Now, how to manage equity-focused evaluations? Here we try to group the main steps of an evaluation process. You know, you can group it in 5 steps, 10 steps, whatever. I mean, here is just an example. We group it in around 6 steps. The first one is preparing for the equity-focused evaluation. The second is develop thermal reference. The third is designing the evaluation, then collecting, analyzing evidence, then coming up with the findings, conclusion, and recommendation, and utilizing the evaluation. So we will try to go through each one of these steps very quickly. Once again, you can download the book with all the details and everything. So really, I'm just going through it very, very quickly. So when it comes to the first step of preparing for the equity-focused evaluation, first of all, is that the first step is to determine the evaluability of the intervention's equity dimensions. As you know, the idea of evaluability is really to see if that means to look if there is a clear theory of change or a clear result framework, to look if there are clear targets and clear baselines. But in the case of equity-focused evaluation, we are always talking about disaggregated data. And that's an additional challenge in the case of equity-focused evaluation, because as we all know, to come up with disaggregated data is much more complex from a technical point of view, is much more expensive, much more time. So these are all additional challenges. Evaluability is also to see that you have an M&E system in place, that you have the indicators, that you have the means of verification, that you have the sources, etc. But the idea of the evaluability assessment is not to say, well, sorry, it looks like we don't have the elements, we don't have enough elements to evaluate the program, therefore we are not going to proceed with the evaluation. That's not the idea of the evaluability assessment. The idea of the evaluability assessment is to detect the challenges so that you will be able to build in the thermal reference whatever additional activities you will need to do to be able to evaluate the program. And here we are pretty lucky to have Michael Bamberger, who, in addition of being one of the co-authors of the manual on how to design and manage equity-focused evaluation, is also one of the co-authors, among many other things, of the real-world evaluations. And in the real-world evaluation, he explained very clearly, if you don't have a baseline, how you can construct retroactively a baseline. So they gave you some tips on how to do that. The important is that you add those activities in the term of reference of the evaluation, so that you will not arrive in the middle of the evaluation discovering that you are missing some key elements to be able to carry out the evaluation. Then you have to identify the evaluation stakeholders, including the workshop groups. As I said, the workshop groups, they should be involved from the right beginning. It shouldn't be just simple key informants or just some sources of information. I should be involved in even in the design of the evaluation. Identify the intent used by the intended users. Budgets. In case of equity-focused evaluation, that's very important because, as I said, generally speaking, an equity-focused evaluation is more expensive. So it's important that you have the appropriate budget from the beginning. And identify the potential challenges in promoting and implementing equity-focused evaluations. You may have technical challenges, but also political challenges or social challenges. And it's important you identify them right in the beginning so that you can come up with a strategy on how to address them. Then when it comes to developing the TOR, of course, I mean, you have to define the scope, the purpose of the evaluation, always with focus on equity. Framing evaluation question. In the manual, there are several examples of evaluation questions focusing on equity. And then select an evaluation team that has to be technically strong but also culturally sensitive. And with this, I would give the floor to Michael. Sorry for the rush. We have only 15 minutes. So, Michael, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everybody. Great to be back in. I'm going to talk about evaluation, how to collect, to interpret the data. So, importance of having an evaluation framework. Evaluation because that you would like to have a very difficult to collect strong framework kinds of data that you'd like. Very often data is segregated by percentage of children data is extremely sensitive. fully understand. One framework I'd just like to briefly is the bottleneck framework, which UNICEF has used. You're asking the factors which affect the use by the vulnerable population of the services you're providing, and this looks at three interrelated groups of factors. There's the supply side factors that perhaps the from right language to the maybe don't use them. A whole range the time services locate the context, something which is very often overlooked in evaluation. Affect the youth. Of just each of the stages of the of this model, with the use of services by some participant observation groups. So the framework helps you to identify the collection which you're going at each of these stages, and with the particular dimension to which enables you to the processes which you've observed. So mixed methods are particularly critical. Just one example. And you, all of them. Of the people inside too. Gives you do a causal analysis. Are you just trying kind of that far with the equity evaluation yet. It's particularly critical that it should do, because one of the issues to demonstrate ministries because the range of the targets that you're able to, that you can actually have an improved effect on them if one of the areas because research is weak that you're couldn't get, and people say, well, this would be far too expensive, or it's really the area relatively weak focused. Remind us when we're thinking about evaluation is looking at is a really simple number of services, often targeting a limited population, or the other extreme, multi-component national level program with many different stakeholders involved, many different elements, very interlinkages between the components. A program for combat human trafficking. Design. Evaluating because technical change as well as provide not to get yourself lost in touch. The boundaries. Who is it that the program reaches? It doesn't reach a geographical or some context of how the way people think about programs. Range of systems analysis approaches which are very helpful. Programs so complex, there's no way complex programs, often each of which can be evaluated separately and and one side of a large slum like Quebec. Those as a control. Pipeline design often this is where you look at the overall the Ministry of Education doesn't really do it, the Ministry of Social Welfare doesn't, where certain groups just fall through and nobody's really countries maybe you seconds I've got left. Rise. Divide. So get round to the process. Are opposed to equity evaluation methodology. Of the vulnerable groups, the threat. Mental problems. You can have a challenge. I'd like to make, which is interesting. One of the challenges of using an equity focus for evaluation is of development. In the Human Development Index, for example, this is doing really great. Mortality is really all of the. You find that the it's on the human development challenges be shown up badly by focusing on equity issues. So that proves to be quite a challenge. You've got the community are reluctant about what you're doing. Policymakers may be reluctant. It may be costing you more to do this. So there are a lot of real challenges that you have to face. Is that there are relatively economical ways that you can do these evaluations. They don't have to be incredibly expensive. And among other organizations, it's showing how you can creatively use a great deal of data which is available but which hasn't been exploited. So you really have to focus on this, have a very commitment. It can be done in your level of expertise, within your resources. So we wish you all success in all of the evaluations which you hope.
Thank you, both of you. So we're diving right in. That was a great start to our afternoon. What we're going to do now is I'll take 2 rounds of questions or comments. If it is a comment, please try to be concise. and then we'll go back to the panelists for their comments. So, show of hands. We have a roving mic for people who aren't at the table. Okay, I've got one here. Why don't you go ahead while others? Okay, I've got another there. Why don't you go ahead? I'll take 3 or 4, and then we'll go back to Michael and Marco. Please introduce yourself as well.
My name is Madhumita Gupta. I'm the mission economist. Also looking at the whole MEL for when, as we look at more, how do you use development innovations to kind of promote development. But I have a question which is maybe not a fair question for this audience, but when you deal with issues like equity, especially in India, the dimensions are so huge at the goal level. And no matter how big a donor you are, your program is so minuscule down at the ground level. How do you establish that link when you're evaluating between whether you are influencing, whether you're contributing, or whether whatever changes you're seeing can actually be attributable to your program? I mean, how do you do that? What is that methodology? I am completely lost.
Great question. There was a hand down here, I think. Yeah.
I have 2 questions to Mr. Michael. Do you have an example for my better understanding? Is that how contextual factor affect the usage of the services, mainly for the vulnerable group? And do you have an example to say that how the overall progress positive for certain groups and negative for certain groups?
And could we get your name, please?
I'm Satyanaran Ghosh. I work for Water for People India. I manage the India program.
Thanks. Any other questions? Comments? Over to you, both.
Share the presentation, we will share also the questions. Perhaps I start with the first one and then the second one for Michael. I mean, it's a very important question that actually is an important question not only for equity-focused evaluation but for evaluation overall, and then brings back the discussion about are we evaluating the attribution of an intervention or the contribution of an intervention. And that really depends on the nature of the interventions. If the intervention is let's say, at project level, what we call a closed system, in the sense that the partners that are implementing the project, they have control over the input, the activities, the output, etc., then in that case we are talking about attribution. But if the intervention is more at program or policy level, and I think that was the case that you were bringing, where even if I talk about UNICEF, I mean, if you compare the budget of UNICEF in India, if you compare to the budget of the federal government, is really just peanuts. So then definitely in that case, in case of program policies, we are talking about open systems where UNICEF, for example, or any other organization is only one partner, is only one stakeholders, and therefore we are mainly talking about the credible contribution, and we are not talking about attribution. So this kind of tension between contribution and attribution, I think it really depends on the nature of the intervention that we are evaluating. So in the case of policies or complex programs with the multi-stakeholders, etc., we are going to look more at the contribution analysis, and we are not talking about attribution.
Okay, we'll take another round.
Should I address the other question?
Oh, yes, please. Sorry.
So I was hoping you wouldn't give me time so I could avoid the tricky question. So just a couple of examples of how contextual factors affect both the evaluation of equity and also the outcomes of programs. The first example, I was evaluating the Australian government's programs on human trafficking in Southeast Asia, and one of the contextual factors came out there that there was a very big issue of males being trafficked for labour, kidnapped and put on fishing boats and so on. And it was very difficult to get any of the government agencies to recognise that this problem existed, because culturally we know that only women get trafficked because they're weak and they're not able to look after themselves, and men are strong. And so it was just a long time before there was any recognition that it was an issue for men, even when the data was there because of this cultural factor. Similarly, it was very difficult to develop programs for young boys who were being forced into prostitution, because in our culture that doesn't happen. It's only the tourists who come, but a man in Cambodia or Laos wouldn't do that. So again, the sort of cultural framework makes it very difficult to acknowledge the existence. Then just one more example, understanding the sort of political and ethnic conflicts in a particular community can have a major effect on understanding how a program can develop. In Papua New Guinea, we're trying to develop a program of markets. This is in collaboration with UN Women, making cities safer for women. One of the issues which people were aware of but hadn't been fully incorporated into the design was the incredibly high level of ethnic conflict. And so there were cases of women being gang raped in the middle of the market and nobody doing anything. She's not from our ethnic group, it's not our problem. And so I'm not saying that nobody understood that this was an issue, but it wasn't built into the program design of thinking about things like locating all of the stalls for people from one ethnic group in one area and so on. So that was just an example of needing to understand the ethnic dimensions. And finally, the political conflict. One of the issues which affects a lot of the political dynamics of urban slums is that very often private land has been invaded, and the owners are trying to pressure the government to get the land back, and so they won't allow roads to be put in. So in a lot of countries, if there aren't roads, services are not provided to health centres or to schools. And so again, understanding the political dynamics of the pressures not to provide services to the groups in the urban slums is another factor. So the point to make there that many evaluation designs don't look at contextual factors. You do your pre-test, your baseline and your post-test, just looking at the project community. And a lot of particularly quantitative evaluators are not even aware that there is a context. You just come in and just look at your target population. So contextual factors are extremely critical. They need to be built into your evaluation design, and I think equity-focused evaluations tend to address that quite well. Everybody is very aware of the importance of these factors. So.
Okay, now I'm going back out to the floor. I see a hand down at the end of the table. Go ahead, please. Yeah.
Me? My name is Alka Malhotra. I work with the Communication for Development section at UNICEF. My question really relates to understanding, of course, the importance of context. Feasible is it to undertake an equity-based evaluation of a program that may not have had equity as a thinking framework to begin with? So the design itself was universal. And then is it feasible to do an equity-focused evaluation? And if so, I'd like some guidance on the kind of things to keep in mind, besides the context and the supply and...
Thanks, Alka. Joaquim?
Yes, it's Joaquin Aleman, and I'm the Chief of Policy Planning and Evaluation in UNICEF India. And my question is a bit provocative also to try and make us think to what extent equity-based evaluation is not a very strong cutting-edge rights-based evaluation, because we're taking the rights to the ultimate consequence, which is basically there where it matters, where we have different populations that may not be having access to the services and so on. We are basically disaggregating and looking into. So a bit of a conversation on how rights-based and equity-based can or are or not different. Thank you.
Any others? Okay, yeah, please go ahead.
I'm Ajit, I'm a student. One notices also, just to add on to that question, that there was something a few years back, a fashion called results-based evaluation. And it seems very similar to what this is, except that you have equity as one of the objectives, stated objectives. So what would be different about equity-focused evaluations from a results-based evaluation with equity as one of the stated objectives, please?
All right, we'll go back to the speakers. Some good questions there.
Okay. Well, perhaps starting with Joachim, I would imagine you can go on with your question and also answer to your question probably. I mean, when it comes to what's the difference between equity and right-based, I mean, mainly equity, the entire idea of equity is based on the human rights-based approach to programming. And as I said, I mean, when it comes to the equity-focused programming, the final aim is human rights for everybody. That's also, let's say, the basic of the human rights-based programming. So equity is a strategy to achieve human rights for everybody. Is a strategy that recognizes that different population groups are in different situations, and therefore you cannot have the same intervention for everybody, because if they are in different situations, they need different interventions for everybody to achieve the same human rights. On the first question, is it feasible, and I would add, is it fair to use an equity-focused evaluation for an intervention that was not designed to be pro-equity, let's say? We discussed this in the UN Evaluation Group. The UN Evaluation Group is a network of evaluation offices from the different UN agencies. So the first question was, should an equity-focused evaluation be used for all interventions, including for those who were not designed to be pro-equity? And at the end of the day, we say that when it comes to the UN, at least, for UN agencies, the answer is yes, because human rights is in the DNA of the UN. So all interventions designed by the UN should be based on human rights. And therefore, when evaluating a UN-supported intervention, we should always look at this issue of human rights and equity, etc., even if it was not specifically designed for to be pro-equity. Now, is it feasible? Well, yes, it's feasible. And perhaps Michael could talk a little bit more on how to evaluate an intervention with an equity focus when, for example, the target was not set to be equitable, or when you don't have baseline disaggregated, etc. Because there are techniques, as I say, to reconstruct baselines, to reconstruct theory of changes, etc. So perhaps, Michael, if you can just briefly talk a bit, because that's very much related in reality to the real-world evaluation. And the last question, I mean, how similar or different is equity-based evaluation with result-based evaluation? As I said, I mean, equity-focused evaluation is not a completely new approach, is not completely new methodology, etc. Is mainly to use existing methods, existing tools that I'm sure many of us already use, but with a very clear purpose of looking on the effect of the intervention to the most deprived, and also looking at the effect of the intervention to the gap between the worst off and the best off. So we're not talking about a completely new approach, but we are talking about applying a lens, an equitable lens, when when we look at the intervention. And the graph from Nepal, I think it was quite powerful in the sense that it makes the difference even on the findings that you can have if you are using an equity-focused evaluation or not.
Okay. So, thank you. Just very briefly to add to that, I think that an important political issue, if you're using an equity-focused lens for a program which didn't have this in its design, is the question of accountability. Program managers very much object to being assessed on things which were not part of the terms of reference. You find the same issue if you're looking at the gender dimensions of programs. You know, that wasn't in the design. It's not fair to assess me in terms of that. So making it clear that you're not assessing the managers, but that you're looking at the learning some of these issues for future program design. One approach which is helpful in that kind of situation is using the social exclusion framework, where you're looking at which sectors of the population haven't benefited, without putting in any value judgment of whether it's good or bad. We're just saying that different effects on people living in rural areas, on urban areas, different ethnic groups, and so you can bring in the equity dimension there if you wish to, in a non-sort of value judgment way. You can just say that handicapped children had lower access to school, or that ethnic minorities had different outcome indicators. So that's a way that you can introduce this in a non-threatening way, which incidentally is often a very useful way to incorporate gender. A lot of countries don't like you coming in as an outsider saying, I know gender is an issue in your country, even though I don't speak your language and I've never even visited a village. But if you use the social exclusion, you're not just looking at gender, or you're not just looking at the disadvantage, you're looking at the whole way that your service delivery is working. Then just a final point for a way of introducing this. If you can show that an equity focus will help the agency to achieve its own objectives, for example, of reaching a larger percentage of the target population in a way which can be cost effective, you can open the doors to getting some level of acceptance. If you're doing that, you want to think strategically of starting by looking at some of the disadvantaged groups which are not so politically controversial. You may not want to start in many countries that the first group you look at have different sexual orientations, for example, if that's very controversial. But children who are physically handicapped, in a lot of cultures, that's not a major sensitive issue. In some it is, but that may be a way that you can start working there and show that you can reach this group in a cost-effective way without it being sort of threatening, and you can show that you're going to be achieving your objectives. So I think there are ways of addressing this without criticizing people, getting into too many controversial issues. So and I think a lot of organizations feel that you need to be aware of, in the same way as you need to be aware of the effects of your programs on women and men, you need to be aware of the effects on different groups. So I think it probably should be brought in, but in a strategical way, so it's not confrontational.
Is it a hot response? Okay, quick comment, and then.
Yeah, I think in response to the questions, I think every evaluation has equity inbuilt. It actually depends upon the layers equity we are talking about it. I think if you're talking about desegregated by gender, even in gender, if I would say we are talking about specifically caste vulnerability, or if I would say even disability we're talking about. So the layers of equity is something which is very important, and it could be, I think, very expensive if we want to have so many layers of equity built in. But I think most of the evaluation have some round of equity built in, whether it is desegregated by gender, I think in today's time. But the layers is something which we have to decide depending upon our resources.
Okay, so starting to get the juices flowing, so perfect time to take a coffee break and do a bit of networking, meet somebody new working in this sector. We're going to have a 15-minute coffee break. So do try and be back by 3:35 because it is a sort of odd room, so it's a little hard to settle in. So try to go down quickly and have your tea and coffee. I think it's down on the lawn. Somebody will lead us. But a quick announcement first by Marco before we do that.
Yeah, so I mean, this session we had only 40, 50 minutes, so it was really just a kind of introduction. I just wanted to tell you that in your folder, you have additional information. We have an e-learning on equity-focused evaluation where we have 13 classes where you have, each class is taught by different people. We have one on gender by UN Women. Well, we have even Catherine talking about feminist approach to evaluation. We have one about system approach to evaluation, etc. And it's free of charge. So you just have to register and you will see the instruction here. And I mean, we just got the first round, 5,000 people from 150 countries who register, etc. And then the second one, this one, we have also a resource center on equity and gender responsive evaluations, where you can access a lot of tools and methodologies, etc. So once again, I would like to invite you, if you want additional information, some practical examples. You also have some selected example of equity-focused evaluations that you can download, etc. So then you can access the electronic resource center.
Thanks. So 15-minute coffee break, and then we're going to come back and talk about India and a real example of a cash transfer evaluation. All right, let's get started. Thanks, that was remarkable. We actually did all go down and get back up on time. It just shows how keen everybody is to keep talking about equity-focused evaluation. Okay, so we're going to now move more into India. So Shiv Kumar is going to start by just giving a few words to contextualize some of what we've been talking about in the case of India. And then we're going to go into the example of evaluating cash transfers. So let me just introduce our next speakers. Dr. A.K. Shivakumar is probably known to many of you. He's a senior advisor to UNICEF. He's also a member of the National Advisory Council in India. He's a visiting professor at the Indian School of Business and at Harvard, at the Kennedy School. He works on a whole range of issues: poverty, health, nutrition, basic education. He's been closely involved in building the field of evaluation as a founding member of the International Development Evaluation Association. And with that, I'll hand it over to him. Yes.
Thanks. And I stepped up here because at least I'll be able to see everyone. Good afternoon. I'm going to make a slight change from what the program says. I'm not going to go further on equity and give the Indian perspective on equity. I think all of you have got a very good understanding of it, and Marco and Michael gave an excellent presentation. I just want to take 5 or 7 minutes to set the stage for this discussion on cash transfers and give the additional time that I released to SEVA, which is a fascinating project, and I'm sure you'll be interested more in hearing about that. Just a quick comment on the discussion we had on the equity-focused evaluation. One of the lessons that I take away from this for India is that we really need to have a differentiated analysis of people and communities in society when we are planning interventions. I've been in several discussions, for instance, of the National Rural Health Mission. And one of the questions that was asked at the mission steering group about 4 weeks ago was, does the NRHM have any plan for the health of tribal communities in India? Now, Jairam Ramesh asked the question. He's the Minister for Rural Development. He's very concerned about the Maoist-affected districts. He says, do you have any plan for reaching health care to Maoist-affected or districts of India? And the answer from the NRHM was no. So it really throws up the question that when you don't have an equity focus and you decide over here on how to implement programs, you have a standardized way of looking at things, you have the same formula applying to everyone, it begs the question then, how do you really address? So obviously your outcomes are going to be very different. You're not going to be, without a doubt, all of you would raise your hand and say, if you don't have a strategy of reaching communities in tribal areas, if you're going to do the same formula, same mechanical multiplication exercises, obviously the outcomes are going to be poor. So I think we really need to get that handle on and push for this. The second thing which always comes up when we're talking about equity focus is this issue of discrimination. I think some of our friends here raised it on how do you take the issue of Dalits and tribal communities and so on and so forth, that it is not sufficient to stop the analysis or stop the evaluation with saying, yes, we did an outcome analysis or we looked at outcomes and we found that from an equity perspective, the achievement of Dalit children is worse than that of the other. Answering the question, why is it so, is important. And I think that itself is a very complex question, because in India, as somebody pointed out and as our presenters also said, the layers and layers of inequities are quite deep. Understanding both class, caste, gender, superimpose on it location, and so on and so forth. So we really need to have a much more serious consideration of discrimination, if at all you can recognize it. And the forms of discrimination, some of them are obvious, but many of them are so latent that that the evaluative methods that we use have to really be very sophisticated to pick up discrimination, even in something as simple as delivery of services in health and education. So I'll stop with that and move to cash transfers. Of course, it's a very contentious subject. Every time I'm in the Planning Commission, I've been asked the question, are you for cash transfers or are you against cash transfers? And I think that's the most stupid way of asking anybody any question on what is your position on cash transfers. Obviously, the answer is it depends on the situation. And you cannot be a dogmatic person today saying, yes, I am against it or I am for it. And I just want to tease out for you the 3 or 4 questions and why I take this position that it's a stupid question. In the context of India, and I think that's the charming beauty of the SEVA project that UNICEF has been supporting, which we want to hear about, first is this matter of financial inclusion. So first of all, people need to have bank accounts. And I think there are this is an important case to be made, irrespective of whether the government is going to give you any cash or transfer it or not. I think financial inclusion must be pushed, and particularly for women, it's extremely difficult because the bank wants to know proof of residence. There are no, even in urban areas, a woman normally will not have a rent agreement, will not get the electricity bill in her name or a water bill in her name. The property is not in her name. And for children, it is even more difficult because even for my kids, to get them a bank account, I really have to swear on, stand on my head and swear that they are my kids. But it's very complicated. So we really have to push for financial inclusion for the sake of financial inclusion. The second one which we are caught up in is this UID card. And this again is a very problematic issue. And I think if you ask me what is my own position on the UID card issuing, the identity number, I would say that it's extremely important and one must support it, especially for the poor, the migrants, the homeless, and people who don't have any form of identity. Many of the surveys that are coming out are saying that those who have any of the following 5 forms of identification, passport, driving license, ration card, election card, a PAN card, are also getting the UID card. But if you don't have any of these 5 forms of identification, the probability that you will have an UID card is extremely low. And so I think, especially for migrant workers, for street kids, for all the homeless and so on, we really need to have some form of identity which gives them both security and some dignity in society. And having said that, I would also go to the second point I wanted to make on the UID cards, my own view, is that it should be completely voluntary. And I don't think it should become mandatory at all. It should be entirely voluntary. And therefore, my concern is when you link it up to pensions or when you link it up to receiving services, then there are several problems that I think you're all concerned about and aware of, which I don't want to go. Third is this cash transfers. And here again, I want to, in the context particularly of what SEVA has done, there is a lot of confusion on what a cash transfer is in India. And I just want to put out 2 or 3 terms in front of you. One is a cash subsidy. So the public distribution system, where if the market price of rice is 30 rupees and you're able to buy it at 20, you're getting a cash subsidy. The second is a cash incentive. So the girl child schemes that you have in India, when a girl child is born and you let that child be born, we'll put 5,000 rupees in her bank account. If she gets all her immunization, we'll put another 5,000 if she finishes. That is a cash incentive scheme. And I think we have a number of these cash incentive schemes like this, which are sort of one-off or something like that. The Janani Suraksha Yojana, where if you go to the institution and give birth to a baby, that's a cash incentive scheme. It's a one-off. It's a cash incentive scheme. A cash transfer, which is what we are talking about today, which has not been really tried out in the sense that it has been in many parts of South America and Africa and so on, is a regular basic income transfer. So every month you will get a certain amount of money from the state. So that is the difference. So these 3 terms were sometimes I've heard people say, oh, but the NREGS is a cash transfer scheme. So if you work, you will get cash. If you don't, it's a conditional cash transfer. If you don't work, you don't get the cash. But we are all that way conditional cash transfer employees. If you don't go to work, none of us is going to get any work. So we have to be very clear on what we are talking. So this is actually a basic income grant support. And there are 3 terms that are very interesting, one of which is here, conditional or unconditional. Again, there's an argument for conditional, there's an argument for unconditional, which we will understand and see what the verdict is. Targeted versus universal. So in fact, the SEVA one is unconditional universal. So what the SEVA project does is everybody in the village, regardless of how poor you are or how rich you are, gets the same amount of cash every month. So it's a universal, unconditional cash transfer. And if you saw the debates on food security, the whole question of should you target the poor or make it universal, that always remains an issue, and we have been struggling with that. So there is conditional or unconditional, targeted or universal. And the last one, which is actually quite interesting, is should the benefits be uniform or differentiated? And in the National Advisory Council on the Food Security Bill, of course, we took the high ground that all of us, universal, should get the same quantity of food every month per capita. But then some people ask the question, is that a fair system? So if you are in a village and I am a rich landlord, should I also get 7 kilograms of rice every month? And the poor person on the street, on the road, who has no hut, no roof over the head, should she also get 7 kilograms? Or is it not fair from an equity perspective that I get 7 and she gets 10? So there's this uniform versus differentiated entitlements, which is also a question that the SEVA project, should everyone get the same amount of money, or should the poor get a little more, or the more deprived get a little more than the others? Should it be targeted or universal? Should it be conditional or unconditional? So there are lots of questions that come up. And so I'm just going to pass it on now to SEVA to tell us briefly what they have done. It's a very interesting experiment. But it also, I think, from an evaluative perspective, will raise the questions of how do you do the evaluation, how does it contribute to policy, how does it contribute to public debate and discussion, and enrich our own understanding of cash transfers. So I'm going to stop there and over to Sarah.
Thank you very much. And so with that, we're going to hand over to Sarat. Let me just introduce him. He's the research director at SEWA, and he's the director of the ongoing Madhya Pradesh Unconditional Cash Transfer Pilot Project that he's going to be talking about. He's a sociologist by training and has been an organization development consultant for several organizations in the voluntary sector. He's a trustee of SEWA Madhya Pradesh and has been working with SEWA for the past 17 years. Earlier, he taught at IIM Bangalore. So over to you.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's really a pleasure to be a part of this fraternity of those who are associated with evaluation, because that's another hat I wear, apart from working inside SEVA. In fact, the first 16 years ago, when the reason I came to SEVA was as an evaluator. So the donor, one of the donors of SEVA had asked me to go to SEVA Madhya Pradesh to evaluate. And then they asked me to continue. I think these are the things which were echoing in the presentation in the morning. So I continued with them as an organization development consultant to implement the recommendations. And then I think the role of insider-outsider started becoming a little difficult to walk. So I decided to jump inside SEVA. So I became a trustee, and I'm an insider of SEVA last 10 years. It's also a pleasure from the point of view of the project we are doing, because we are at the threshold of our harvest. Our final evaluation survey, the data processing is done. We are almost at the point we are about to analyze. We have not yet started, but we are getting the final evaluation survey data. But we have been at it for more than 2 years. It's been quite exhausting. But parallel to the surveys, which we will come to, we have also been doing qualitative analysis. So it's possible that some of the insights are coming from the qualitative analysis. So let's progress, and thanks, Shiv, for giving that extra little time, because it's so difficult to compress in 20-25 minutes something that we have been at for a long time. A quick introduction to SEVA. SEVA is a women's trade union. It's a trade union of women's workers in the unorganized sector. It was founded in 1972. It has, this is old data. This year we have 1.7 million members. SEVA is interested in cash transfer because it's an opportunity, it provides an opportunity of a modest regular income in the hands of women. This regular income is really the key word. We will come to it when we see the results of the study in the hands of the women in order to supplement income from other sources. So there was a discussion. We had an internal discussion. At the time we were discussing in 2009 and 10, in fact, the cash transfer was not such a hot issue. I think it's, I don't know if it's an advantage or disadvantage for us as SEVA, that precisely when we started doing this survey and study and all that, that is when at the national level the issue became so big, and then the government, political parties announcing, taking position and posturing on this. So if internal discussions actually said that we should try this option out. We should see the potential it has, what potential cash transfer has for social protection. So this was a kind of an experiment. We want to see to what extent it can be of use, not just to our members, but for the poor. Can cash transfers work for the poor is the bottom line question that we ask. Then why unconditional cash transfer? As Shiv has already pointed out, that if you see the delivery issues, you see the clogging of the pipes, and the government budgets are increasing, but the delivery system remains the same. And it's also a direct method of delivery, which is transparent. You're all aware of what is the percentage of the actual welfare budget actually reaches the poor. And also, the conditional cash transfer assumes that people are not capable of taking their own decisions. So, and then cash stimulates local economic growth. Unconditional because conditionalities and targeting introduces bureaucracy to monitor and evaluate, thereby leading to corruption. So as soon as you say these are the 5 conditions on the basis of which you will get this particular benefit, somebody has to ensure that those 5 conditions are adhered to, and then you can see the street level political party leaders trying to become the arbiters and the brokers who include and exclude people. Our hypothesis broadly is that direct UCT induces behavioral changes individually and collectively, resulting in an overall improvement in the welfare of the families and in particular nutrition and health of children and other vulnerable members of the family. Other vulnerable members being disabled and other challenged. Seva believes that people in general, rich or poor, are rational. They can take their own decisions based on long-term interest. And it providing poor households with a modest regular income could lead to more regular access to food and health care, and then better quality of living standards. A few more. Why? Because I think unconditional transfer, cash transfer, as Shiv has already clarified, that it is something that is not very well understood. It lends itself to a lot of confusion. It has not been tried in India before. We need to test the efficacy of it. And if, as Seva, as a national trade union, the study shows that it is going to be useful, it can work for the poor, we will certainly take it to as a policy advocacy. Let's come to the basic design of the pilot. It's universal, it's unconditional, the only condition being that that person has to be a resident of that village. The transfer is to the individuals, children getting money from the mothers of the children will get the money. And they are monthly transfers. They are not one-time grants or quarterly or half-yearly. They are every month they get. The overall design also of the research project also is to assess the role of a voice organization, whether voice organization makes any difference. We will come to further on that question. And subsequently, initially it was for a period of 12 months, but later we extended it to 5 more months. We later, when Madhya Pradesh government asked us that why you have chosen non-tribal villages and why not tribal villages? Can you also do a tribal village? That is when we also took up an additional tribal village to see 100% tribal village to see what the behavioral changes in that. So there are basically 3 surveys we did in April 2011. We did the baseline survey, which is the census, and then interim evaluation survey, and the final evaluation survey, which is complete, and the data processing is also almost complete. Then we have, earlier, I think in the earlier session, we were talking about the triangulation. We have the qualitative study. We did overall about 100 detailed case studies, but out of that, we have selected the real good ones, 50 case studies, and also contextual analysis. On this contextual analysis, I just want to pause here a bit. We take it for granted that even the rural, in the rural milieu, it's cash economy. It is not necessarily a 100% cash economy. So when you introduce cash, what would it mean in a context where there is a lot of barter system, there's a lot of people give grain and then buy other goods because they can stock up their grain. So the wages are paid in terms of grain. So in that kind of an economy, when you have a contextual analysis of that kind, it actually throws up the real impact, which is where I really liked the morning's concept of the equity-based and the disaggregated evaluation techniques. It's very important because in our study, we realized that the qualitative and to go deeper into the milieu and to that community is extremely important. We have taken 20 sample villages in Indore district, 10 Seva villages and 10 non-Seva villages. This is the distinction we have made, that we want to know 10 Seva villages means where Seva has been working, and non-Seva where Seva has never worked. And out of which we have chosen randomly 8 cash transfer villages, of which 4 are Seva and 4 are non-Seva. The amount transferred is 200 rupees per adult per month and 100 rupees per child. In the extension period, which is after 12 months, we increased it to 300 and 150 because of the inflation during that intervening period. For women in Seva villages, this is important. Accounts were opened in Seva Cooperative for the rest of and for the rest we did in the nationalized savings bank. So opening accounts for
people in 8 villages was a big, big, big nightmare for all of us, for the team, basically. I mean, I'll quickly run through this, and let's come to the results. It avoids choke pride, improves delivery, it helps raise women's socio-economic status. These are the hypotheses we have different. We have about 12. It reduces small borrowings and also helps in repaying loans, increases financial inclusion, boosts the local economy, encourages setting up of small businesses, which we have recorded in our case studies. It helps people to escape falling into poverty, direct means of better food security, and sanitary conditions, particularly nutritional status of children. In fact, in the tribal village, we found real big impact on the question of nutrition. It also has a positive impact on school attendance. These are our hypotheses. Likely to discourage child labor. But one is not sure whether the dosage that we give can really push that far. But it generates a certain discussion within the households. It has generated a discussion within the households. So these are the quick demographics. These are the numbers. I mean, this is the number of people who benefited, who were part of the cash transfer, and the tribal village is 670. If you look at I'll just skip the rest. I'll just look at the accounts. When we started, this many people had accounts in the banks, and then when we actually finally rolled out the cash transfers, and this many people, we had to push the banks, and almost at various levels, we had to really pressurize them to open the accounts. The current status of the project is we have completed baseline. Cash started in June 2011. Interim evaluation, then after that final evaluation survey, and then this is another part of the triangulation, this key informant survey. And so apart from the qualitative analysis and the quantitative statistical study, we also got another source of information for the key informants. And as I said, we are almost completing, and by mid-March we should have results coming out. Qualitative analysis also is in the last stage of field work, and contextual data is being corrected, and this also we should have by end of March. If only this roundtable had been in March, we would have actually given all the tables. Okay. These are some indicative tables from the interim evaluation survey we did. How are we doing? Okay. You can see the impact on spending. The spending, it has increased in school uniforms. You can see that 44% and 29, 52 and all that. So for the medicines and for hospitalization, you can see the increase in spending at least. Let's go further in school performance and attendance, because we also collected, we don't have time to explain how exactly we did that, but we also collected from the school records, and also we interviewed the school teachers and school staff. So we found this also, the school performance also, we found some increase in it, quite a serious increase actually, and attendance. And the savings also have increased. In income earning activities, so new businesses coming and more income earning activity we have also noticed in the cash transfer villages as opposed to the non-cash transfer villages. This is financial inclusion. I think we already discussed. So in the non-cash transfer villages, only 13% of women respondents had bank accounts, while 82% do not. In cash transfer villages now, all of them have 100%. Okay, these are insights from the field. As I said earlier, that in most of these villages, particularly in the tribal village, there is the whole, what cash actually this cash did was, it had provided liquidity. Now, liquidity is what is lacking. So there are people particularly the poorer sections, the tribal, the scheduled caste, and other poorer classes, there is a culture, there is a whole way of life of borrowing. There's a regular borrowing. I think all the shops are geared to give them loans. So when they get their provisions
on credit, they are charged an interest, which is invisible. Actually, it doesn't show up. So this we found that particularly in the poorer sections, the liquidity has made a big difference, much more than what the cash would have purchased. What I would say maybe a strategic difference. Because on Wednesday for the market, if you have to go, and on that particular day you don't have cash with you, you have to either borrow or you have to go and take it on credit, because of which either you buy less or you pay a more interest if you want to buy the same quantity. So in that case, actually the quantity of provisions that they bought has also increased, and the reduction of borrowing. This because of the monthly transfer. And it lends itself to, monthly transfer lends itself also to planning and saying, and also their credit worthiness. So in that sense, like I said, that cash transfer may not be relevant in all kinds of situations. But as far as this milieu is concerned, you can see this kind of a very important effect. Yeah, as I said earlier, money transfer is very effective. Monthly transfer, it improves the credit worthiness of the poor. They say that, okay, this money, a month, 14th of this month, yeah, I'm going to get this money, so can I take this? I won't take it on, I won't pay interest, but then they said, okay, we know. They will come and you'll collect this money, we'll give. So that improves the credit worthiness also. Now, the direction in which our field data is showing is that cash transfer per se, in isolation, one may not be able to vouch for it, but we see 5 elements. One is it has to be unconditional, it has to be regular, it has to be through a bank account, definitely, it has to be an individual transfer. In fact, I think when it's individual transfer, it's true that it becomes difficult for some people to go to the bank, but it generates a discussion, particularly for women. In the Seva villages, cooperative went and opened the accounts and actually did the transaction in the village itself. That is where we see every month they are getting the money. In other, the nationalized banks, we have had problems about bank not releasing that money. They say that, why do you come for 200 rupees? Come after 3 months, you can collect 600 rupees. It's a waste of our transaction time. So, but when you do this individual transfer, it generates a discussion within the household also about, this is my money, but I'm giving it to you. Okay, so that kind of a solidarity within the family builds. And there also another issue we probed into was about the pooling that was done. This was one big issue that we have put in the questionnaire about understanding that for what purposes people have pooled the money over time and also within the household. Now, okay, we are planning a comprehensive report, a book. These are quickly, I'll read out the chapters. Are we okay? Then these are the various chapters that we have worked out, and this is constantly changing, but these are related to the hypothesis that I talked about earlier. Child nutrition and health, and cash transfers and health, schooling, women's status and empowerment, work, labor and time, pooling cash transfers, family and community solidarity, incomes, assets and consumption, economic security and resilience, financial inclusion. So, that's quickly, I think that is to give a broad idea. Coming to the policy discussion, do I have some more time? Coming to the policy discussion, somehow the discussion has been made into cash versus food, where you're talking about what Shiv also was saying, that as a substitution cash transfer. But if you look at unconditional cash transfer, also I think another word that is being used internationally is basic income. Now, so as Seva, we are not yet sure about whether we will prescribe universal cash transfer. in a country like India with its kind of population. But for us, in this project, we did universal cash, we included everybody more as a research strategy, so that the rich in the village also cooperate with us. There were some rich in some villages who refused to take it, saying that you're giving us 200 rupees and taking all our signatures and identity cards and blah, blah, blah and all that. Maybe you will take away our lands, and maybe you'll take away whatever. So they refused. But interestingly, in the same households, after 2 months, women wanted it. So they all came together and said, men don't want to take, but we want to take the cash. So women, or most of the women so even in the rich household, as Seva, mostly we work with the poor. We actually hardly work with the rich in the villages, but this was one opportunity. But we see that in the richer households, the impact is more on women. The impact is more on the old people who depend on the able-bodied, the leaders of the family. So this was quite interesting, that in the richer families, the other thing was the young girls were also very aware, and they were making their claims that this is money coming in my name, so I want this and this and this and this. I want to save this money. So that kind of a discussion it has generated. So that is the reason why. So the universal part, it was a good strategy. It worked with it helped us to function smoothly in the villages. But we are not very sure about the policy as a policy prescription. But unconditional, yes, because we know as Seva, we are very acutely aware that we spend a lot of time at the grassroots level with the government officers accessing the existing entitlements. We would rather spend that time in mobilizing and making people aware and also doing policy work. But when you have entitlements, I think they should have some mechanism, some way of reaching the poor. Why should we spend a whole lot of energy into already existing entitlements? So for somebody whose ration card is lost, it takes about a year or even 2 years, or sometimes they don't get also. So that is the reason why conditionalities are a real big problem. As Seva, at least certain types of entitlements which are related to basic needs of the people, if they can be monetized, if they can be converted into cash transfer and then have an efficient method of delivery, which we find this is as an efficient method of delivery, with the new technology it's also possible, then I think it would be real, it would make a big difference. In fact, I think your equity focused thing, that is what I also realized, that for which section what is relevant, what kind of entitlement you can monetize, and what kind of entitlement is effective when you give it as cash, and what kind of thing is not effective when it is not given as when it's given as kind. That is one thing. Then the last thing I just want to mention and then leave it at that. In these villages, we find that maybe it's because of the district we have chosen, that it's not food poverty that you find so much. It's health poverty, because most of the shocks that families get, particularly the poorer families, is because of the health shocks and health crisis. And a lot of borrowing happens for health shocks, and of course for weddings and funeral rites. These are the big expenditures. Food, by and large, they plan and they manage food. The people don't starve as much. But these are the things. So I think that is where one can focus. If you say that health, if it's possible to monetize it, should we monetize nutrition? In fact, in the tribal villages, that's the last observation or example I'll give. We can take it forward for the discussion. Normally, in the non-tribal villages, when people buy a buffalo, they buy a buffalo in order to, there's a very clear system of a trader in the city of Indore, and he gives a loan to this particular villager then he buys with that loan a buffalo, and then he repays his loan through the milk. So there's a tendency not to consume that milk at all in the household. All the milk is completely given because you want to repay as much as possible, and you want to extract as much as possible from the buffalo also. So, but we found really interesting contrast in the tribal village. The tribal village, they don't buy this commercial buffalo. They buy ordinary indigenous cows, which are they come for 4,000 rupees or 5,000 rupees. Maybe they give 1 liter in the morning and 1 liter in the evening, or 2 liters in a day. And mostly all of them bought this for their consumption. So that milk directly went to the children. Of course, only when children they consume, and that is exhausted, women will consume. So mostly that just gone. So that is at least we would say that 20-25 families in a village of 125 households have bought. But goat they buy for commercial purposes. They bought goat with this money, but goats and the hen. Okay, thank you very much. I look forward to a fruitful discussion.
Just come up here so I can see everybody. So what we're going to do now is I am going to have a round of just questions of clarification. So I'm sure many of you have questions about particular design issues, etc. And then we're going to use this example to jump off and talk about other work, including studies some of you might be involved in, and also just ask some questions around, how would we know if this worked? What does working look like? How would you measure that? And how would you use your findings? So we're going to have that conversation next, but first I do want to open it up to a round of questions, clarifications about this particular study. Yes, go ahead.
They don't have the cash per se to buy the quantity that they're entitled to. So one of the questions was that when we were giving 200 rupees per adult individual and 100 rupees per child, was there any impact on the PDS uptake? Number one. Two, when we are talking of tribal villages, the places that where we work in, we also work with tribals, and there's a lot of migration, especially in the hunger period, where especially when there is water scarcity. Did this affect migration in any way? Did this, stop migration or affect migration?
In fact, it was a coincidence that when we started this project, when we started the rollout of the cash transfer, that particular year, Madhya Pradesh government decided to give, for their own logistic reasons, to give 3 months grain at one go. As you were saying, so it's the supply side that decides how the grain will be given. So fortunately, that was the time they had this liquidity. So in fact, in many villages, there was actually a increase in the uptake of food provisions. So when you see the discussion as food versus cash comes in, you find actually that is ridiculous, because food with cash is a great combination. It need not be a substitution. So that's the reason if it's unconditional and non-substitution, it works. In terms of migration, I think the amount was not so significant to make a big difference. But in the tribal village, I forgot to mention one point. In the tribal village, we completely removed the external bank. Every month, because this is an experiment on cash transfer, we decided that we will directly give cash every month so that they get it in their hand. We found in other villages there were problems, banks were creating problems, people could not go to the bank. So we increased the amount to 300 rupees and 150 right from the beginning, because these are lessons we learned from the other project. There we found reduction of migration, distress migration. because they were able to, tribal village means that all of them have 1 to 4 bighas of land. And there is no very rich farmer and there's no poor. So they're almost in a similar condition. So when they could invest money into irrigation, when they could invest money into their agriculture, which was difficult when there was no cash, definitely the migration, distress migration has reduced. But as an employment opportunity, in order to meet the needs of the family, when it's required, they do migrate. It has not completely eliminated, because migration, it's only when it's distress migration, and it's a problematic thing. But when its migration is for good purpose, it can be.
I have 3 questions. One is, was there any control mechanism from your end to look at the utilization of the cash transfer? And was there any negative impact in terms of the domestic violence, in terms of the alcoholism increase or decrease in the village? And the third question is, was that the whole family has a bank account, or each individual of the family has bank account? If a whole family has a bank account, then is it feasible to look the same things at scale? Is it feasible for state and national government to adopt this kind of approach? It's maybe for transferring subsidies or any other thing, keeping the security, unconditional bank account opening things, keeping the security in mind.
On alcoholism, I think this we as part of our this conversation and a dialogue wherever we went, I think the first question anybody says about cash transfer is the poor will drink it away. But we really tried our best and worked very hard to get this issue out. We actually have not noticed alcoholism increasing. On the contrary, we are actually now probing this question in the tribal village. The reports that are coming from the teachers and the other key informants, I interviewed them myself. They are saying that their alcoholism has actually reduced. We need to still probe into that question. Which is a very, very interesting thing, because I think the particular dosage that we gave, the amount that it can go into their income earning activities, I think people have more work to do, and they don't want to, I don't know. So that is the kind of thing. But in general, the kind of both qualitative analysis, the key informants, and from the data, we see that before cash transfer, every village has 2 drunkards. After cash transfer also, every village has 2 drunkards. So what women said was that whether there is money or not, a drunkard will sell anything in the house and buy his drink. So he doesn't need a cash transfer as such. So that is the kind of very layered things are coming about alcoholism. The second thing is that about domestic violence, we think we had any proxy to assess that. But on women's empowerment and the questions of women's status, all those issues are there. And then control over their resources and all that. And the individual accounts is that we strongly believe that if we make it a household thing, it automatically moves in the direction of the household head getting the money. For example, the Madhya Pradesh government gives they were already monetized school uniforms, and for bicycle they give to children. You find that it is given to the head of the household. Now, that is not something as Seva we. So, individual cash transfer is important, because I think every disabled person or women or those who are excluded from the mainstream, they should also be entitled, they should also open accounts, and they should be part of the economy. It's the very bottom line of Seva. I think the entire discussion around direct benefit transfer that government is proposing, I think they are talking about all kinds of ways in which how to fix the last mile and how to go to the villages rather than villagers coming to the bank. I think one has to, using the current technology, it's a challenge. One has to definitely do it. It's important in itself, as I think she was putting that financial inclusion is important because financial inclusion is important. So scale-wise, I think definitely in the next 5 years, a lot of effort will go in that direction.
Sure.
And for example, I would say that, for example, scale-wise, we would say that wherever cooperative opened accounts, for example, in the Seva villages, cooperative opened accounts and gave money, did the transaction. But then the problem with it's a very successful model. And there are many spin-offs out of that kind of a model of transfer. But then the operational costs are high. You can't replicate it. So even the government will say that because Seva is doing it's working, but otherwise it's apart from the cost factor, because Seva is doing it's working. So we can't apply it to some district, Morena district or Bundelkhand area.
Thank you. I want to raise more policy-related questions on what does cash transfer really do and what does this project tell you? It tells you that if you get cash, people will go and spend it on health and education. Now, is that necessarily a good thing when you know that the quality of health care, I mean, as Amartya Sen tells us, the private health care that these people are accessing is dominated by quackery and crookery, he calls it. So why are you giving cash to these people who are going to get third-rate health care? Similarly, if you say that they're going to spend it more on education, the question to ask is it necessarily contributing to better quality of education of these children? So in a system where the state has not provided even decent health care and decent education, does cash transfer make any sense? Is it really a way of the state saying, boss, here is your cash, you go and find the best health care you want? You will never get good health care like that. So if I have the cash, and I'm talking from now to the government, should I be saying that, okay, I will invest in strengthening the sub-center and providing free cashless transfer to the poor, or should I just give the money, save money to these guys and say, fend for yourself? It's a very important question, because the argument we're having is, in a state where, in a country or in a society where the state has not been able to provide basic services, beware of cash transfers. And that's one of the things that this study is throwing up. The second is, I don't think we really can say whether universal is better than targeted. Yeah. So I think for you to say in one of your 5 elements, the major thing it has been proven is that universal, no, that we cannot conclude. Unconditional also is not, see, if I have a budget constraint and if I have this thing, then these questions will always come up. Uniform or differentiated is not clear also. If I have limited money, should I give 50 rupees to rich families and 300 rupees to poor families? Should I do that? So there are a lot of unanswered questions. So before we begin to say that my study is proving this, I think we have to go a little deeper into what exactly the evaluation, very specific evaluation questions that you're going to ask.
Okay.
For me, the first one is the more interesting one, that give cash to people. It's a very good thing, and they'll get the best healthcare and best education for their children and their families. It's a real problem for me. You cannot substitute government's responsibility for public provision by giving cash.
So I see a whole set of hands up, and I'm going to take them all, but I'm going to throw another sort of question out there for you, which you can grapple with. I think we're going in that path, or you can just keep building. And it's really that question of, did it work? And it seems like a very simple question, did it work? But of course, that requires determining, well, what does working look like? So if it worked, what would it look like? And so working to you might mean something quite different than working to somebody else. And again, coming back to those equity questions of, did it work for whom? So if I were to ask all of you in the room, and how would you determine whether it worked? And paying attention particularly to the difference between a construct and a measure, right? So if we say, okay, well, if it worked, you would have healthier communities. That's a construct. But if the measure is more spending on healthcare, that's a measure. And often your measures and your constructs, especially when you're talking about equity, there can be quite a gap there. And again, often when you're doing studies, you have limited resources. So you can't have, hundreds of measures because, arguably the more you have, the more good measures you have, the more they can sort of balance each other out and you can get a bigger picture. So again, I'm throwing another question into the mix. You can address it or you can keep picking up these threads of, how would you look at this and tell me whether it worked or not? And how would you measure that? But there was a whole row of hands. So I see the man in the green sweater, in the brown kurta, in the white shirt. So please, one after the other.
Thank you. Actually, I am from National Trust for the Welfare of Persons with Autism, Cerebral Palsy, Mental Retardation and Multiple Disability, Ministry of Social Justice and Empowerment. We implement a scheme for health insurance named as Nirame Health Insurance Scheme, under which more than 120 lakh persons with these disabilities have been enrolled. And through ICCI Lombard, we implement this scheme. We charge 250 rupees and 500 rupees based on the income from the family of these persons. And we provide health coverage up to rupees 1 lakh in lieu of this. So Madhya Pradesh government is the only government who has partnered with our scheme and is doing free enrollment to all the beneficiaries in the state. District collectors have been directed to enroll these persons, and under this scheme more than 5 crores rupees we have released to these families so far, and till now it was through checks. ICCI Lombard issue checks, and they used to send the checks to the poor families for this, and we were facing enormous problem for delivering of the checks. Many times it returned to us, we again send us, again it come to us, we locate the address, pin code and resend it like that. Now we are introducing the cash transfer. We are making the account number mandatory so that the amount is transferred to their bank account. Also, I would like to add that in all other schemes also we have introduced the cash transfer, which has shown very beneficial to these persons. Thank you.
Okay, yeah. And
no,
then after
the beneficiary name, the amount is going in the name of the beneficiary, and through this way we are not only providing the health services cost, but we are empowering these poor persons who are till then were staying under the courtyard. They are not coming out, but through this scheme we have been able to bring these persons in the mainstream. Their disability certificate have been enrolled. Actually, online enrollment provisions we have made under this scheme. So lot of reopening has been done through this process, and the Times Social Impact Award has been awarded for this scheme as a best scheme in the government sector.
Okay, thank you very much. We have a number of people who want to come in. So in the white shirt.
Hello. Hi, I'm Pala from PHFI. The main issue I just want to raise is that what's the reason behind this kind of inequity related schemes? Is it to eliminate the inequity in the society, or to empower the poor population to spend more? Like as the result of the study says that the persons who are getting their cash transfers are spending more on healthcare and education. So, and other thing is that you also mentioned that they're easy to have access to borrowing more money. So, is this leading to another circle of vicious cycle of indebting more and more people in terms of providing them more liberty to have an access to borrowing? Or is it positively affecting the society, or going the other way, making the poorer more and more in debt and ultimately becoming more poorer at the end? And the other question I was just asking is about the evaluation that you did. Is that you mentioned that baseline evaluation and final evaluation you used the census data. So how did you differentiate these two results from baseline first and final evaluation? How did you evaluate?
Okay, before we go back to Sarath, I'll just take a few more rounds. Yes, in the brown, you've been waiting patiently.
While I'm Manisha, I have no issues about supplementing household income with basic income transfer or whatever quantum. But my concern is more, my question is more about the policy aspect of it. I heard you somewhere say that for a, it would be desirable that at the policy level, certain basic entitlements are monetized. That is what was your concluding kind of a thing, indication. And in the beginning, you were talking about the non-desirability of substituting the existing entitlement. So somewhere I heard a kind of a contradiction. If we were to take your concluding thing that certain basic entitlements should be monetized and given, then in my view, it is probably the education, the right to education, which would not be that simple. It has got components that the government will guarantee education, no fee, textbooks, uniforms, midday meal. These are the basic kind of entitlements that a child will have in India going to a government school. Now, which of these components would you like to be monetized, or all of them? Number two, then what does it happen to the education system that the government is talking about strengthening and giving more resources to strengthening? Number two, service is, or entitlement is the health. Now, where would you pitch in this kind of an understanding? Whether it should be the insurance route, because eventually it will come to that debate. That either you have an entitlement to walk into a sub-center or a PHC or a district hospital, have diagnostics and drugs and clinical treatment done to you, free of cost or at a very subsidized level, or you monetize these and give something like RSBY or something, a package of insurance. So which route will we take according to your understanding? The third area is the food and security, nutrition security. That is another service, according to me, entitlement, which is very fundamental for the well-being. Here we have two major universal kind of programs. One is the PDS, with differential effectiveness across different states, and one is the ICDS program. Now, would you like these to be monetized? Alternative. A very clear, I mean, I would really like to understand from you, what is the stand?
Yeah, go ahead.
I'll start with your question. I think today's debate is at a stage where it has come to posturing or for or against. So one is maybe in the process, one is trying to, in order to say that cash transfer is not harmful, in order to say that, probably one is actually overstating a case. The whole point I'm trying to make is that one should not roll it out as an option. Now, I think it's a much bigger debate whether the state should continue its PDS shops or not, or monetize it, or health services should also be monetized because state has failed or cannot actually install a system and run a system efficiently. I think this requires much, much more debate. I think what this study can come out and say is that when you inject cash into this X, Y, Z families in different layers of the society, in a village, rural milieu, in this particular context, where does that money go? How does the household economy function? And so all the prejudices, one is also addressing all the prejudices against cash transfer. One is also addressing all the prejudices about the poor. So I don't think this study will give a very clear policy direction in terms of what can be monetized and what cannot be monetized. I think all that it can say is that this is how people would behave when you give unconditional basic income or monthly regular income. That's all it can say. It cannot actually go that far because I think we are talking today about a whole paradigm shift in thinking of welfare and the role of state. And there's a whole lot of issues are there. Much more serious issues are there. I think that's it. Now, coming to the other question of are people spending more, I think I would come back to the same thing that we are trying to see where the money goes. So when I say that their credit worthiness has improved, I'm only referring to where they get their seeds from, where they get their household monthly provisions from, and also the local doctor, whoever is available. In fact, in the villages, you know that they don't get monthly income. They get only season-wise when there are 2 harvests, and those 2 harvests. So the entire system of supply side is also geared up to their schedule of having cash. So there are mostly doctors also take money once in 6 months. So they maintain an account. So shopkeepers do that. So a lot of that happens is when they get the seats. But then when I'm saying credit worthiness improves, the shopkeeper who would say that you already crossed your limit, he would say, okay, next month you're going to get the money, so I will give you wheat or oil. Or that is, in that sense, I said. So I think these are not very sweeping statements about going up to the policy. This is what is the field is throwing up. Coming to the baseline and FES, I think it will take really a long time to explain that. We have a similar questionnaire for the baseline and also for the final evaluation survey. We are trying to measure the proxies. We are trying to measure different hypotheses that we have, different indicators as to what has happened to them over a period of 1 year. And we have control villages and we have transfer villages. That kind of comparison also is there. Beyond that, into RCT methodology, I cannot really go because I'm not an economist or a statistician. Professor Guy Standing should have been here to answer that question. Yeah.
Okay, but I'm going to make a small intervention and then we'll go back to the floor. And it was just really, again, one of the other areas we wanted to talk about was use, so use for policy influence. And I think here you've got this really interesting example of a study that sort of almost, that sort of began and then became such an issue, and there's really very little research on this area, so everybody's sort of quite keen to see the findings from this. And in this absence of sort of any strong research one way or the other, I mean, I think those who want to go in certain directions are going to be looking to mine any positive findings, and those who sort of want to go in other directions are going to be doing the opposite. So it's this very odd example, because I think often as evaluators we're sort of standing there saying, I have a study, and here's this example of sort of journalists, policy analysts, people sort of waiting for the findings of this study. But I think what it also points out is the limits to evidence, and you need to build up a whole body of evidence. And so also understanding some of these questions in this particular context doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to work that way in other contexts, right? So there's these questions of, would it work in a different type of village? Would it work? Are the systems, are the institutions in place to make this feasible at going to scale? As Shiv pointed out, there's always other options. Would it work better in terms of getting towards those constructs or those outcomes than these other 4 things that we could do with the money? And so there's always that mix. And so again, I'm going to go back to the floor for hands, but also if anybody wants to come in on sort of this idea of policy windows opening. Here you've got one, there's a lot of openness, people are interested in the findings, but also the potential of misuse of findings, wanting to maybe use them to say things that the findings don't actually in and of themselves say, and also sort of other experiences others might have had with other studies where that sort of come out. But there was a bunch of hands, so I'm going back to the floor for a final round of comments. Why don't you maybe stand up, the people who want to speak, so that we can kind of make sure we catch all of you. All right, or wave your hands wildly. Okay, so there's 3 here, and then I saw sort of 3 in the corner at the back there.
Me? Okay. Just a quick comment on the baseline, just to clarify. When you said about census, it's not actually using the census data, it's the complete enumeration of that particular village. So in the baseline and the end line, all household of that particular village is surveyed, right? So it's not using of census data. But I have a comment on the utilization of this data. I'm also part of research team. Sorry, I didn't introduce myself. I'm Kumar, working with UNICEF in Madhya Pradesh. I'm also related to this project in some way or other. Now we have a huge challenge of using this data from different perspectives, because we have different types of layers, as he mentioned in his previous session. We have Seva versus non-Seva, we have travel versus non-travel, we have again cash transfer versus non-transfer village. So this all analysis and all these findings will take, I think, huge time to come up with concrete findings. Just whatever he has presented or whatever we are discussing right now, it's some of the understanding of fields from the field, and also based on the IES. IES, we had, the interim evaluation survey, we had actually a small survey, a small sample of 800 or 900 households. So to come up with the concrete results and to see different layers, it will really take time, and that's a challenge also to come up with concrete results.
Yeah, my name is Mario Mosquera. I'm working with UNICEF. So my question is, you're talking unconditional cash transfer. And the thing is, what are the main ingredients, apart from just transferring cash to the community? If you take into account the framework you gave and the previous speakers talk about the supply factors, contextual factors, and demand-side factors. It seems to me that behavioral economics assumes that just providing cash to the community, they are going to do the wise decisions. So you need to include or incorporate in that intervention something that educate people to make wise decisions.
I'm going to come to you at the very end, so let's take you'll get one final word. Yes, Kultar.
Yeah, I think I have one question specifically for Shiv. Like, there are a lot of conditional grants transfer schemes rolling out. I just want to know your opinion, how much of it is by politics and by populism, and how much of it is influenced by evidence, as Catherine was mentioning, if I would say, because as an evaluator, we know few of the conditional cash transfer schemes are not working. And in fact, government has also, I think, admitted that. So how much of it is the populism and the politics, and how much of it is actually influenced by evidence?
Okay, you've got a minute or two to think about that, Shiv, before I come to you. But over to the back corner, there was 2 or 3 hands. Is there step forward and grab a mic?
Alka, I spoke in the morning too. Morning, before the coffee break. I will not ask any question on the evaluation, because I think we have to wait till the rest of the results come and really look at the criteria and how it's equity focused and what it's showing up. But I have a question on the methodology regarding the case studies. So you've selected 100 case studies and then shortlisted 50 out of them. Would this mean that the case studies were random, and would they cover both edges of change, the intended, the good, the positive change, or would it also cover some of the unintended changes that some of us were talking about, but perhaps the case studies can tell us more about that? So one is that. And second, I have a comment. We've used the most significant change technique extensively in the communication for development work that we've been doing. And we find it very effective in throwing up case studies as well as debate at the community level in selecting most significant stories of change. So I'm going to just table that as something that the group might want to consider for using for evaluations in the future.
Hi. A question about methodology. Linking it back to the earlier session, I'd just be interested to know whether you designed the evaluation with an equity focus, and if you could give some specific examples of how the equity focus was integrated into the design.
All right, so great question to end with. Sarat, over to you, and then I'm going to go to Shiv.
On this active focus, I think maybe Shiv, can you take that? Active focus. Okay. Okay. I think I'm glad you brought this up on case studies. Actually, I didn't. That's one thing missing in the presentation. The first point about criteria, we have taken about 10 types of families in each village. We try to cover all of them. The 10 types are rich farmer and landless laborer, scheduled caste, landed and scheduled caste without land, scheduled tribe with land and without land, women-headed households, old couples, single old women. So we had actually a list of 10 to 12, and in that particular village, whoever we could possibly get, we have covered all of them. That's why the total number of case studies has really gone up because of that. The second is, in fact, even much more crucial issue of methodology. That, for example, when you go and interview people with the framework of what have you done with the cash transfer money, the biggest question, the problem with the cash transfer is that cash is fungible. You cannot isolate and you cannot establish the causality that an attribute and say what happened to my cash, what happened to the cash that was given to you from this project.
Now, in an economy where they're spending 2,000 rupees or 4,000 rupees in a month, it's like asking the government, where is my tax money, which road you have constructed with my cash. So this was a very big challenge for us to do the case studies also, because the conversation about cash transfer would end after 3 questions. After that, they will say, yeah, we have done this, we have spent it on education, we have spent it on health, we have done all good things, so don't worry. Please continue the cash transfer. Okay, so we just, to bypass that kind of thing, what we did is we created 8 different blocks of questions. Only the 8th block is about cash transfers. The first 7 are about the various aspects of their life, their practices, their spending patterns, their spending behavior, and what the sources of income are, what are the sources, where they spend their money. So a whole lot of descriptive stuff about the family. And by then we come to the 7th block, we establish basically we map the family's spending pattern and income sources, and from that the answers to the cash questions are there. So it was quite an elaborate thing in order to get under the skin and try to get that. Then the question about what are the interventions. So Alka, that's the response to your question. What interventions from SEVA? So I think this is also was missing from the presentation, that we had a parallel financial literacy trainings in all the SEVA villages, because that's the reason that we wanted to see the difference between SEVA and non-SEVA. In the SEVA, all the 10 SEVA villages, we had all the 4 cash transfer SEVA villages, we had financial literacy programs, and also other SEVA's work that happens. And since cash transfer was an important activity that was going on through SEVA, lot of interventions, people wanted some support for their livelihood, trainings for their livelihood, animal husbandry, and also we had many camps for their animals and all that. So a whole lot of interventions were there in the SEVA as part of normal SEVA's work. An important one is that in the SEVA villages, women's accounts were opened by the Credit Cooperative Society, and Credit Cooperative Society actually went and did the transactions in the village. So that was one intervention. And the other thing is that they also, to preserve the sanctity of methodology of not intervening, not influencing their thinking, that's also part of the study. I think we voluntarily, we asked them if they want to save. So savings also we've seen the improved. So those kinds of interventions have been there, not to make them spend wisely, but basically our inputs from our end as SEVA, what normally SEVA does in such contexts. I think on this active focus, you can answer.
Thank you very much. Last word, Shiv?
One last question. On the evidence for these, by the way, I just again want to clarify, we have not had a cash transfer scheme in India, which means that you get a regular income into your bank account month after month after month and after month. So we have had cash incentive schemes. And it's very interesting, the very little evaluation has taken place. Take this girl child program. Haryana introduced this girl child scheme where they started giving 5,000, 5,000, 5,000 about 23, 24 years ago. And the first systematic evaluation is being conducted this year by ICRW. But in the 20 years, it's supposed to change people's attitude towards the girl child, reduce daughter aversion, and so on and so forth. But in the 20 years, so much has changed. And even to argue remotely that this cash incentive scheme has contributed towards reducing the discrimination is bizarre. Somebody asked, you do a small intervention, does it have a big impact? And I was just finding out what was the amount promised in 1990 to a family that went to, now the Delhi scheme is 5,000, 5,000, 5,000, and 18 years later you will get 100,000. 18 years later, that is in 2012, what was the amount that the Haryana family got? 22,000 rupees. So today, 100,000 rupees, which you will get 18 years, looks really huge. But when you actually get this, so everyone is laughing. What is this? 22,000 rupees for a Haryana family today in this thing. The assumption again that it's the BPL families that discriminate against the girl child. so we'll give it. So there are a lot of problems with these kind of schemes. Conditional versus unconditional. We have been fighting to say this maternity benefits. It has to be unconditional. I think I cannot even imagine how a mother is going to certify that she's breastfeeding, exclusively breastfeeding. They're stupid. They had the JSY, they said if you're married below the age of 18, you will not get the benefit of institutional, this cash incentive. If you have more than 2 kids, you will not get. Again, the arguments, some of it can be evidence, but a lot of it is also much more ethical, moral debates on why do you want to penalize this young girl who had first of all, no say on when she's going to get married, has no say on her fertility decisions, cannot say how many kids she wants to have. So it's a real unfairness in the system. So a lot of these conditions and conditional things need to be really looked at from this point. Having said that, of course, what the government has done, I congratulate them that they haven't gone into so far, not publicly gone into food and services. They have said pension. Of course, it is conditional on the fact that you're over 60 or you've retired. It has to be conditional cash transfer every month. Or scholarship. Of course, I need to know that you're genuinely registered in a college. So those are all conditional cash transfers. So I think we should get away from this. But the point I'm trying to make is this, dividing this, are you for or against this, again, as I said, is useless. But we definitely need to systematically go on evaluating and throw up much more evidence in different contexts. What doesn't work in Haryana might well work in some other state. The influence of context, the influence of the overall state of human development, the awareness of women, and so on will make a big difference. Thank you.
Thank you. My work here is almost done. The last thing I've been told to tell you is to please fill out the feedback forms. And I'm going to hand it over to Shubh Kumar Range, who's going to make a few final closing remarks and let us go. So over to you, Shubh. So they're not letting you off the hook. So the question is, how did you bring an equity focus into your design, if you did?
Oh, you mean equity focus? Equity focus. I don't know if I can quickly answer that question, but there are various elements that we have introduced. In fact, as I was listening to the morning's presentation, I realized that a lot of equity focus has gone into it. For example, we ensured that the respondents should be both men and women equally. And in the last survey, which we did after the second extension period, we did, in fact, the tribal final evaluation survey. We are also interviewing all the individuals, apart from having the primary respondents for the main questionnaire. We are also interviewing all this, so that the normally excluded sections like old people, disabled people, all of them will be, otherwise when you go and ask for the primary respondent, usually you will get the male of the family, or instead of making it random, we ensured that women were at least equally there. And then in the interim evaluation survey, we went by, we wanted to actually have what should be the criteria to do a sample. So the sample we took was the caste and gender, so that we cover all the castes in the village, instead of, so that all women should be included. So some of these elements, I think, that we have taken into account. And particularly for SEWA, it's extremely important that the study should carry the voice of the women and what they think and their responses and their experiences, because finally we want to go back to the women's organization to that. Thank you.
Shubh, thanks.
Okay, I know we have to clear out of this room at 5 o'clock, so I'll make it really brief. I just want to make a couple of points which are really promotional in nature. This meeting today was the first co-hosted round table, square table, long table with Community of Evaluators jointly with CLEAR. And this is just the first one, and we hope to be having regular events such as these in future. And what I want to ask you is to several things. One,
Send us your suggestions, send us your ideas for things that you would like to hear about, topics, and so we will look at that and see, what are the top issues people are wanting to hear more about, and as the opportunity comes, we will include such topics, in these events. The second request I want to make of you is to participate, in this growing community of evaluators. Just in the last few months, this community that we started several years ago, just as an experiment, which includes evaluators from all South Asian countries. It's now, membership is growing, it's expanding, and we are enlarging, our activities. So we'd love for you to come and participate and join in this growing body in the region, and also focusing at the country level. National associations and networks are also growing. This is a movement. It's become not just a movement in this region, it's a global movement now. Evaluation is becoming a global movement. And just in the past a few months, we had an international gathering of evaluation organizations from around the world that are actually coming together, supporting each other, and building this effort to support us individuals who are working in small isolated little organizations and so on, to actually strengthen this whole effort. So this is a happening thing, so please join and lend your voice and your effort in that. So thank you very much for coming, and hope to see you again.